Hello, and thank you for taking the time to listen to this Q&A with Lonny Trestrail, medical physicist at Sutter Health, located in California. In this interview, Lonny will discuss how Sutter Health has adopted and implemented the clinical use of Adaptiiv On Demand to create and order personalized 3D printed bolus for use in external beam radiation therapy.
Thank you. I'm pleased to be here to share my experience with Adaptiiv On Demand. Patients that require bolus for their treatment benefit when the bolus we use to treat them with matches what is designed in the planning system. The dose will be closer to what we expect, and patient setup is easier. A couple of years ago, I set out to use 3D printing to improve our use of bolus in our department, and it worked. I want to share with you the process I went through to create a custom bolus lab and why I now prefer to use Adaptiiv. My early printing work started in a veterinary clinic because there are some additional barriers in the human clinic when introducing new technology. And while I got the ball rolling there for administrative approvals and getting blessing from the IT department, I went ahead and started printing in a veterinary clinic. My first prints were models of canine bones to teach anatomy to veterinary students. And anyone who's ever done any amount of 3D printing has experienced failed prints. It takes time to calibrate the hardware and software in order to get a good quality print. For me, that took days, but I also had a clinic to run, and so it ended up taking some weeks before I had that all worked out. And even when I thought I had things dialed in, turned out I had more work to do. For example, the dorsal aspect of this canine skull should be smooth. But once I got that dialed in, it was time to move on to the next phase. I then moved on to printing bolus directly using a different filament called NinjaFlex. NinjaFlex is a soft, rubbery material that makes a really good bolus. And even though I was using the same printer, the nozzle portion was different. And that meant I had to calibrate the hardware and software again, which didn't take as many days, but still ultimately took some weeks to get that dialed in. This is one of the first NinjaFlex boluses that we used clinically to treat the nose of a kitty cat. Now that we were printing bolus successfully, this project had two parts left to figure out. The first half was to take my 9-page how-to and turn it into a 1-pager that any resident or dosimetrist or physicist could use to print bolus on their own. So far, I was the only one doing all the early work, making mistakes, learning from my mistakes, and just becoming overall familiar with the process. And at some point, I needed to be able to delegate this to others in the department. The second half was to more directly take the bolus structure from the planning system to the printer. I was using 3 other pieces of software, none of which are FDA approved, to extract, smooth, and encode the bolus structure to have it ready to be able to print. And surely there's a way to make this process just more direct, a lot easier. Then last year, I added a third half to my project when on the dosimetry listserv, I read a thread about a silicone product called Platsil that others were using to create bolus for patients. The discussion included a simple recipe, equal parts of an AB mix plus an additive and a splash of accelerant. Mix it up and either pour it into a mold or directly onto the patient, let it set, and you end up with a really nice bolus. Where normally I had planned on defining this bolus and printing it directly with NinjaFlex, instead, I was now defining a mold in the planning system, printing that, and filling it with silicone. Here's a photo of the first mold that I printed. Not quite done printing here, but if you notice on the screen, it took 18 hours to print. And I think it becomes obvious here what's at stake when there's a failed print. This is going to lead to delays in patient care. Thinking back, when I was asked when a bolus that I was creating would be ready, my answer was along the lines of, yeah, it should be ready by tomorrow. But I didn't like the should part of that answer, and it really should be along the lines of it will be ready by tomorrow. So as I started thinking about reducing the possibility of failures, maybe redundancies would solve this problem for me. Do I get a second or a third printer? And while trying to work that out, coincidentally, that's when I discovered Adaptiiv. It was this photo on their website that caught my eye. I recognized the amount of work behind printing this mold, filling it with silicone, and making it look this easy. I contacted Adaptiiv to order 2 samples of the same bolus, one made out of TPU, the other out of silicone, and then I poured my version of that using the Platsil silicone, compared all 3, and pretty quickly I could see that I had just found an off-the-shelf solution to what I just spent months developing. In the end, it was an easy decision for our department to move away from an in-house custom bolus manufacturing process that is susceptible to hardware and software malfunctions, and instead to a bolus as a service solution. This is now our standard workflow. Not only does Adaptiiv simplify the custom bolus process for us, but it also gives us a reliable solution that we've been able to count on.